Hey, hello, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of getting students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials.
Wow, and today we have Jeff Gomez. Jeff, are you prepared to engage?
Indeed I am, from New York, New York.
Let's do this, Jeff. And Jeff, that we have today, he is the CEO of Starlight Runner, and he's a leading expert in the fields of brand narrative, story world development, creative franchise design, and transmedia storytelling. He specializes in the expansion of entertainment properties, premium brands, and socio-political themes into the highly successful multi-platform communications and international campaigns. As a producer, he has been accredited by the Producers Guild of America, and he also develops stories in the worlds of films, TV shows, video games, toys, books, comics, apps, virtual reality projects, and theme park attractions. This deepens the engagement and accelerates the development of participative communities, resulting in mass audience approval, brand loyalty, and increased, of course, revenues. Jeff's pop culture work has impacted blockbuster properties like Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean, James R. Cameron's Avatar, Hasbro's Transformers, Sony Pictures' Spider-Man, huge fan of Spider-Man, and Men in Black. Microsoft Halo, Nickelodeon's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and, many, many awesome stuff. He's been developing transmedia campaigns and participative brand narratives for Coca-Cola, Pepperidge Farms, the Spartan Race, huge fan as well. Other current clients that are including Electronic Arts, Sesame Workshop, Disney Parks, Resorts, and World Vision Canada. His methods have been also applied, and this is very interesting for us, into the educational and geopolitical causes. And they have accelerated positive self-organized social movements and increasing resistance to crime, violence, and corruption. Through the application of the collective journey and transmedia population activation models, Jeff has helped optimize communications for large NGOs and addressed crises in Mexico, Colombia. I'll be in Colombia in a few weeks, by the way. Australia, fantastic. And the Middle East and North Africa region. So, Jeff, this is a very amazing introduction, and I'm stoked to have you in Professor Game. Is there anything you would like to tell us before we get started on the interview?
Well, that was a lot of stuff that you introduced. I'm not used to hearing the whole thing read off, so feel free to talk to me about any aspect of the work. I think in our conversation, people will start to understand that there are some fundamental tenets that my company applies that allows us to work in comic books and video games and movies, but also in geopolitical crises and other types of marketing and advertising work.
Fantastic. Thanks for all of that. And of course, I did read the whole introduction because there were many points I didn't want to miss because they are very, very relevant, all of them, at least for me. And as usual, you try to scratch your own itch when you have your own podcast. So
you got it.
I can accuse myself of that, no problem. So, Jeff, the first thing that we would like to ask you, and that we do this with all of our guests, is to know, what does a regular day with Jeff Gomez look like?
Wow, a regular day, no 2 days are the same here at Starlight Runner Entertainment, but the pattern generally is that, we need to understand an enormous amount of information in order to do our work. Because we work in entertainment, but also in global politics and technology. I spend the first hour or two early in the morning just absorbing the news of the day and understanding where my company stands. Often the companies we work with are in the news, and learning the latest developments with them is also very important. I then do correspondence. Amazing things can come through email at any given day. I can be contacted by a politician or a movie director or a film producer, a studio, and I'll do that. But also, I try to devote at least a few minutes a day to students, people doing research for college thesis, a kid in high school who's interested in transmedia, things like that are important to me to stay in touch with people who want to learn more about transmedia storytelling and collective journey story model. Then I get to the meat of the day. What is the job I have at hand? Because my job is to supervise everything that's going on at Starlight Runner, I will look at all of the material that has been sent to me by my various producers or writers, and I will annotate them. So one day it could be a treatise on the mythology of Spider-Man in order to integrate the character into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that's awesome. That's so much fun.
As you already know, I'm a huge fan of Spider-Man. I inherited that from my father. I still have his comic books. So
he's such a fantastic character, and being able to play with him and advise Sony on the best use of Spider-Man and Spider-Man's universe, Venom, and all those other characters was great fun. But at the same time, an hour or two later, there's a client who will contact me and say, "Hey, Donald Trump just did this thing, and we don't understand why he said it and why he's doing it. Can you please explain it to us? What is the narrative that is beneath the words, the superficial story of whatever the president is doing today?" And we have to devote some time to studying, analyzing, and breaking that down for our client too. And it goes back and forth all day, different subjects, sometimes wildly divergent. And of course, our clients are all over the world, so I'll take Skype calls at any given hour of the day, and sometimes teaching classes in China or Eastern Europe through Skype. It's so much fun. And then it doesn't really end at night. I go home and check out the latest shows and Netflix movies and things like that, because I have to know so much in order to be of value to my clients.
That sounds very, very exciting, Jeff. I have to say that.
Thanks. It's fun.
The next thing that we would like to know is for you to tell us a story, and of course, this is probably your specialty, creating the narratives around topics. And this time, we would like to tell us a story of what you could call your favorite failure when creating a collective journey, something that probably set you up for future success or for learning in the future. What would you say has been one of those times?
Well, let me start by very briefly explaining collective journey storytelling, because I can't tell you how I failed until I tell you how I
that makes a lot of sense.
Everyone in the world is familiar with the hero's journey. It's a model of storytelling described by Joseph Campbell that kind of exists in every TV show and movie we've ever enjoyed, even novels, comic books, video games. The hero's journey is the story of the young man who something traumatic happens to him, and he needs to be trained by a mentor and go out into this kind of mysterious world to do battle with the forces of evil. He gains allies and earns the favor of the gods, eventually overcomes the bad guy, takes the treasure and brings it home and gives it to his community. Variations on that we've seen in everything from Star Wars to Harry Potter to soap operas and comedy shows. You just see it all the time. The problem with the hero's journey is it has been commodified by Hollywood, and so in more recent decades the hero tends to be a white male. The journey tends to be one where he is asserting kind of masculine traits to overcome his opponents. There is either a physical or psychological violence in resolving the problem, and the problem is resolved when the villain is defeated and the hero wins. And of course, the community is depending on the hero, so they succeed because the hero succeeds. That's that's problematic because we are decentralizing ourselves as a human race from the Hollywood notion. We are no longer tolerating being dictated to by a single kind of narrative entity that is dominated by a very specific sense of what is right and what is wrong. The internet and social media has allowed us to gain a voice as individuals all around the world. And that opens us up to a diversity of thinking. There are all kinds of different values, all kinds of different ethnicities, cultures, each of which want to see themselves in story. And of course, we are seeing the rise of women and the feminine notion. In fact, the whole spectrum of gender that just is yearning to be represented in story. So I am suggesting the collective journey as an evolution over the hero's journey. The collective journey takes all of these kinds of voices into account. We don't need to be the classic blonde-haired, blue-eyed male hero in order to conquer the bad guy. In fact, we don't have to polarize the conflicts in our stories anymore. It doesn't have to be about good and evil. It can be about a diversity of senses of what should happen, because the system that we exist in is flawed, and so these story worlds can represent systems in need of healing, in need of different ideas, diverse ideas combined to heal them. So we're starting to see the emergence of collective journey stories on TV. Game of Thrones, Orange is the New Black, The Walking Dead. These are whole worlds with lots of different characters, not necessarily an individual male hero who's going to save the day, right? And each of those worlds have systems that are flawed. In fact, they're so flawed, we might, the world could be destroyed if we don't fix that flaw. And these stories are huge, epic stories about different groups of people kind of knocking heads, sometimes killing each other in the process, but hopefully working toward what is ultimately a common goal, the healing of this broken or damaged system. We first started examining collective journey narratives when we're watching people self-organize around social media to create movements. The Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, really, really fascinating, because these movements don't have leaders. They just are a bunch of people who said, you know what? Let's do something about this flawed system. Let's join forces spontaneously and try and fix it.
That's fantastic, and it's something that we've seen going all around. And to be honest, when I heard your talk in Gamification Europe, the first thing I thought is what's more of a collective journey than the journey that students take through the educational system. I mean, what could be more of a collective journey than that? And there's many aspects that I think, and we'll probably get into this throughout the interview, but I thought it was fascinating, and a fascinating approach, especially. In my case, of course, I'm flawed towards thinking in education and training and learning.
Well, let's talk about education, because that was one of the first real applications of collective journey storytelling that we applied in the field, and the results were really interesting. But also challenge. You said, can you talk about some failure? There was a little failure there too. So, would you like to direct this to?
Please, let's do it. Sounds fantastic.
That's great. We were approached by a university in Australia about helping them to retain students who were indigenous or were of low socioeconomic status, or were immigrants, international students who were coming to the college and the university, and they were fairly quickly they were failing. They were dropping out of university, and they had tried a number of remedies that did not work. In fact, they had many services designed to prevent students from dropping out, but they were failing. And because we have this kind of transmedia approach, the ability to kind of generate interest and fandom amongst an audience, they thought, well, maybe there's some application to getting students to stay interested and stay loyal to the university so that they can make it through. So we went and explored this, and what we started to learn right away was that there was a disconnect between the way that the university was communicating and the way that these young people were receiving language or understood the language of this huge bureaucracy, and they didn't get it, So how do you apply collective journey storytelling to get students to understand what's going on? It wasn't easy. A lot of the students were indigenous Australians, and they came from rural communities that were highly didactic, where there was a kind of simple cause and effect in their lives, whereas university can be oblique. They can assume that you know how to do research or how to discipline yourself in order to get your work done. They assume that you know how to navigate a complex bureaucracy or even physically navigate yourself around a campus. And what we discovered was that none of that was the case with the students.
Too many assumptions.
Right. So what is the assumption of an administration when they look at college kids who cannot do any of these things? Well, the assumption is they're not worthy of being included in the college. They're not smart enough. They're not studied enough. They don't qualify for being here, so they get kicked out. And really, the problem that we saw was a problem of story, of language. The fact that these young people, came from places where they had no preparation for the kind of story they were being told by the university, and this created a stalemate. And, it was difficult to get the university to change its story. because they're used to doing things a certain way.
Of course, that's what bureaucracy is almost about, no?
Yeah, yeah. Why should we change in ways that will kind of coddle these students? These students need to change so that they, are going to make it through this kind of bureaucracy, because this is more like the real world. And we said no. It's not. It's not that much like the real world, because we don't understand your bureaucracy, and we make video games.
And we're lying outside in the real world as well.
Yeah, yeah. It shouldn't be this complicated. And the language doesn't necessarily have to be so harsh. The first time you reach out to a student who is not doing well with their grades ought not to be a warning. If you don't get better, you're going to be kicked out of school.
Sorry to interrupt, but this reminds me. There was I studied in Universidad Simón Bolívar in Venezuela, and there was like an iconic sculpture somewhere around the entrance. It looked like some sort of a mountain or huge rock, and you could see people climbing to the top of the rock. But if you looked at the details, you saw like micro stories of interactions between people. There was a few people who were helping each other out. But there was a lot of people competing to each other to reach the top and, achieve absolute excellence and, being the best and this whole thing, and the people on top kicking people down so that they didn't reach them. So it was like an icon of the university, and I enjoyed a lot of my time there. It's a fantastic university, but that icon of the university, I couldn't understand how that could be something that they looked up to.
It's interesting because what you're describing is exactly the complexity, the conundrum that we were encountering, and it felt like we were failing because we could not get these two groups to communicate in different ways to each other without them feeling as if they were compromising themselves or somehow compromising their integrity. And here's where a collective journey really came into play. At a certain point, we gathered a number of the indigenous students, the cohort that we were trying to help, and their leadership, and said, look, no one's coming to save you.
Literally,
there is no hero who will stand on top of the hill and lead you over to stay in college and get a degree. No one. So guess what? You're going to have to help yourselves. So we taught them that the very language, the very cultural mythology that they've lived with for thousands of years, which helped communities survive in the Australian desert, ought to be the same set of values that brought them together here on this giant, sprawling, ultra-modern campus, so that they can help themselves navigate together and push themselves through the years and into graduation. So, like your statue, there were a few that were grabbing each other's hands and helping each other up. That's what we were teaching to these young people, and because there wasn't going to be a lot of cooperation on the part of the university, at least at first, what we did was take a multi-platform, a transmedia approach by placing indigenous students in all the different media on campus so that they could have a voice the school newspaper, the radio station, podcasting, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. We made sure that there were student cohort members manning each of those platforms, giving each other voices, and then we taught them how to talk each other through the challenges that were on the campus and how to solve a lot of those challenges themselves. It started to work almost immediately. Really, really exciting to watch them come to this realization that their community and not an individual hero was going to save them, and then to watch them come up with ways to effectively create a translation tool so that the bureaucracy goes in one side and clear English, clear language comes out the other.
That's fantastic, Jeff. That sounds like a very, very exciting moment to have lived. And there's a few things I would like to take from your story.
Sure.
The first one certainly is the fact that there's many things that are faced in your life, in everybody's life, and there's different types of challenges depending on if you're minorities, majorities, whatever your life path is. But I think there's a trend that's starting, as you were saying at the beginning, that's starting to pick up every time some more. And it's the fact that we have to stand up for ourselves. And that doesn't mean that you have to be the hero that stands up for everybody else. That means that you have to be part of that solution, part of that new way of doing things, and that part of that, and that's something that we've spoken about many times. The conundrum of facing education and the many flaws that it has, like many systems. I'm not only talking about education, but that's something that we have to face together. And otherwise, there's not going to be. It's not going to be the president of or the secretary general of who's going to come down and put his hand and heal all the problems that education has. It's got to be us, and I'd like to highlight that as a very, very high point in your story. Is there anything else that you would like to take away from what you just explained very well?
Well, it's certainly the fact that yes, you can give effectively the solution to these to the cohort, to, in this case, these students, but you can't do it without creating very, very simple products and services that can help to accelerate their behavior. And this is where the kind of gamification steps in. I'll give you a few examples of how we kind of gamified the collective journey of these students on this campus.
Please.
Our research indicated that Indigenous Australians have a big problem with failure. They would just as soon go away than to stay there and face failure. And this is one of the reasons why so many Indigenous people leave college within the first year, leave university in the first year. We researched where these young people were most comfortable talking about failure, which is really just to confess a problem that they couldn't solve by themselves. And we learned that culturally, Indigenous Australians talk to each other in the bathroom. It's just a thing in their families, they might gather together, preparing for the day in the bathroom, and kind of murmur their problems to each other.
That's very interesting.
And receive instruction from other family members. So we created a program called Bathroom Confessions on the campus, where we created little kind of ballot boxes in the bathrooms with pen and paper, and you could write down your problem and a way to contact you, and put the paper in the box, and others would take the papers and read them and say, "Oh, I can help this person."
Wow, and it was a community solution as well. That sounds amazing.
Exactly.
A lot of social interaction.
So little things like this truly helped to accelerate, and it's surprising, it's delightful, it made them feel desired, loved, and supported. And it actually contributed to a substantial retention. Our understanding is 5% higher retention from the first year of the program to the second, a spike in 5%, whereas elsewhere in Australia, it dropped by 2%. So that was a 7% spread in the first year. Truly thrilling.
Amazing. Jeff, a quick learning that I got from that, and something that is very important that we talk about all the time, and it's very, very important, it's always stressed, is the fact that you have to understand the people that you're creating something for. That's fundamental, that user research. You can call it many ways in many different areas, but the important thing is that you get to know and understand how these people think as deeply as you can, and that's going to help you. Whatever it is, the solution that you're creating, whatever is the design you're creating, it's going to help you a lot, because you're going to understand if that solution is good for them or if it might not be good for them. And of course, you're going to experiment as well, and you're going to fail, and you're going to learn new things and new ways to communicate with your audience. And Jeff?
If I can add to that
sure.
thought, because it's such a good thought that you're articulating, we try not to run purely on data, on numbers that are handed to us. We appreciate data and know how to absorb that into our work. But what truly helped us and always helps us are what we call micro narratives, which is basically to actually speak
talking to people.
Yes, and giving them a few minutes to tell you their story. When you get dozens or hundreds of them, you start to see very, very powerful patterns emerge that are tremendously helpful.
That's true. So, Jeff, I would like to make you another question, and it's precisely about the collective journey. And it's if we can, I know it's a very complex thing, but give us a few strokes of what you would say is perhaps a process, a way you approach the collective journey when you're going to solve something using collective journey. Is there any approach that you use, or any system, any process that you have for that?
Yes. First of all, we have to acknowledge that that people's default mentality is hero's journey. So we have to make sure that we understand the story that's being told, the story that people understand in the first place. The same exact thing as what we just talked about, hearing people's stories, examining their cultures. But then there's a kind of engine that needs to be constructed in the collective journey that allows us to start figuring out how to get people to activate and get people to truly start to realize what can be done. So that modality basically, in short, goes like this. The first thing we have to set up is a listening mechanism. right? What we call the architecture for dialogue, so that we are hearing what the target audience has to say about the subject at hand, and we can set up a way for those voices to continue to be integrated into the communication, right? Communications fail, particularly in education, when the educator is speaking in a language that the student doesn't even understand. You know, by listening to the audience and integrating the audience's voice, their concerns, their language into what is being communicated, you have already created a powerful bond. So that first step is authentic listening. The second step is to make sure that they can communicate these tenets, these aspects of story to their friends, so that they can spread the word through social media, so that they can reinforce what's being taught to them with their community. And we call that superpositioning, the notion that you are able to take the story and play with it and spread it is super, super important in collective journey storytelling. The third step is social self-organization. What will it take to get people to act and behave in concert, so that their voices, when combined, can affect some kind of change, so that a whole people could lift themselves and improve their knowledge, their understanding, do things like resist extremism or push back at crime. We do this all over the world. So this social self-organization is something that we promote by creating products and services like the bathroom confessions, but on a kind of cosmic scale. And then the fourth step is change making by creating a kind of ticking clock, by creating incentives for people to take action. So you have this big crowd of people who are told that if they just do something small, they can affect seismic change. That's possible now in the age of the internet, and
absolutely.
And so we promote that, and change can and does happen. So those are the four parts of the collective journey engine: authentic listening, superpositioning, that's social media communication, social self-organization, the creation of a movement, and change making, taking action. That movement takes action and something actually happens and changes, hopefully for the better.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. That process sounds amazing, and I'm sure there's many things that our teachers, professors, or educators in general here can implement from that process. And now we're going to move into what we could call the rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Here we're going to be looking perhaps for tips, tools, and tactics that we can implement in our daily teaching, in our daily education, etc. So, Jeff, the first thing, and this is not going to be exactly a tip, but we would like to know, what's your favorite game?
My favorite game? Oh my gosh! Since I was a child, I loved fantasy and science fiction, especially worlds that are absolutely convincing, that I can get lost in, and they need to feel real. So I've loved the latest Zelda, Breath of the Wild.
Gosh,
because
the Zelda things are just incredible.
The world is so fully realized, and the characters are warm and interesting, and I can accomplish a lot of the adventure without killing too many things. I've really enjoyed it.
That sounds amazing. Those are great games. The Zelda Saga is just incredible. The next thing that we would like to know is is there something that you think that is like the tipping point, or the place where you think the collective journey can connect with gamification? How do you think that gamification could actually benefit from the collective journey?
Well, I think all gamification is something that can benefit from story. Without story, to me, gamification is a little bit like offering your dog a biscuit. You ultimately you don't want the dog to need the biscuit in order to do the trick. And what gamification does is it incentivizes us to do something that we don't necessarily want to do, in many respects, not all. So when you layer a narrative, compelling story over the gamification mechanics, you have something that that can last and be memorable and compelling beyond the rule system, and therefore allow for the person who's engaging in this gamified exercise to be able to do it without the points or the rewards or things like that, because then you'll have brand loyalty, or then you'll have an educated student. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So where collective journey comes in on top of all of that is the notion that you're not necessarily shoving your partner down the hill on that statue. That perhaps we can interlock ourselves and help ourselves collectively to accomplish the very thing that this gamified system wishes us to accomplish.
That's fantastic.
And in doing so, we don't necessarily have to discover how we're alike. We can discover how our skills complement one another, how the combination of our talents, our aspirations, our values can be assembled to supercharge us, and make us all able to get through the game faster and accomplish more.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's a fantastic way of linking the whole thing together.
There you go.
Jeff, is there any book that you would, if you had to recommend just one book, which would you recommend to the engagers or listeners?
Well, there's one thing that persists even into the collective journey from the old hero's journey, and that is archetypes. These kind of aspirational, iconic aspects of human character. They apply whether you are engaged with a standard hero's journey narrative, but they also can be really helpful in telling a collective story, because you can combine and mix and match these archetypes to create great, compelling storytelling effects. So one of the best books I've read about the modern, the contemporary application of archetypes is called The Hero and the Outlaw.
Never heard of that one, but we will certainly put it in my list.
Check it out. The Hero and the Outlaw is by Carol S. Pearson. And and you could actually purchase it off various book websites. It's a slightly older book, but it may be even available somewhere in PDF because it's so educational. People kind of give it to each other. Super helpful.
Fantastic. Is there somebody that you think or you would fancy listening to interviewed in Professor Game?
I'm a supporter of women in gaming, and I have worked with a woman named Jade Raymond. Jade used to be in charge of game development at Ubisoft in Canada. She's now freelancing, and she's really fascinating. How she interacts with gaming, her sense of transmedia, her sense of the future of games would be, I think, really interesting to your audience.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Well, Jeff, our time is almost up, so I would like to know if you have any final quick piece of advice for those, especially for those of us who have never engaged in the collective journey, and then how can we connect with you, and then we'll say, well, it's game over.
Yeah, my advice is this: when I was first trying to examine the hero's journey model and why I was a little uncomfortable with it. Even though I loved Star Wars, I loved flashy movies and TV shows, there was always the necessity in our popular culture for a violent outcome. Conflict, And I was a child who was raised in a violent neighborhood, and I didn't like it. It hurt. So I thought about whether story can be compelling, but not glorify violence and celebrate this kind of masculine, aggression, and what I found was that there are lots and lots of stories that pose alternatives if we come to understand that the nature of story has changed because we all have voices now, okay? So what I want your audience to think about is that it's not just hero's journey to collective journey. It is broadcast, right, to pervasive communication, all right?
It's everywhere and comes back and forth.
Exactly. It's no longer that a very few people are dictating to us what the story is. It's no longer that a few people are shaping our daily reality through all of this broadcast communication. Now, we can take many people, ideas, cultures, races, everything into consideration. And it's still possible to come up with decisions, to come up with developments that are mutually beneficial, that are win-win, and that's what a collective journey is all about. It's a new way of telling stories because we now have available to us a means by which we can not fight on Facebook, share ideas on Facebook, and be able to kind of collectively brainstorm solutions. So I'm really hoping that we push through this kind of weird tribal phase on the internet and evolve ourselves into something that's truly productive and creative and amazing. You can reach me You can read about my collective journey thoughts on blog.collectivejourney.com, right?
Okay.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Gomez.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jeff. This is a topic I could certainly spend all day talking about, but we have to reach an end to the interview. So thanks again. And it's time to say game over. Hey, Engagers. Thank you very much for hanging around. I know this interview was a bit longer, but I'm sure that you know that it was worth it. So thank you very much for listening to Professor Game Podcast. If you want more interviews like this one with Jeff, please let me know. You can also let me know through our email list. You can subscribe at professorgame.com/subscribe. That way we can get started and I can get your feedback so that you can let me know what do you think of this episode, of the previous episodes, and what are you expecting in the future from Professor Game. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know why empathy is so important for gamification design and especially in education? Well, then listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!